Hello, my name is Matthew, and I'm here with Ami from Ivan's Nightmare, and we're going to have a conversation about a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, The Garden of Forking Paths. And we both read it in the past week or so. This is the first time that I've read it, and we're just going to talk about the short story. Hello, Ami, would you like to introduce yourself and say hello?
Hi, I'm Ami. It's good to talk to you, Matthew. We've spoken a little bit before, but this is the first time that we've actually sat down and recorded. So excited.
Yeah, it should be fun. So it's always been a pleasure talking to you before, and of course, watching your videos and how you kind of talk sort of thematically and make like video essays about the different books that you're reading. It's really interesting. And I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on this short story because I've read it twice now and I can't make heads or tails of it. It's such a confounding thing to read, and I don't know why. What do you think?
I love it. I thought I picked the story because I thought you would like it, to be honest. I'm curious. You found it confounding. How did it compare to like Tlan Akbar Orbis Tertis for you?
I liked it. I liked it a lot more. I think that the thing that I was thinking about is it reminded me of one of those action movies where at a certain point in the movie everyone's doing things, and sometimes I kind of forget how they ended up where they are or why they're doing the thing that they're doing. And in this book, it has like these. In this story, it has these like set pieces. He's like, there's a main character running to catch a train, and then you find out that someone was following him. Or he meets these little boys, and they're telling him how to take a certain road. To always make a left at the forks. And then he's in this person's house that's like talking about this book that's a labyrinth. But it's always sort of like behind a step, and it's not until the end that you get an understanding of like why the things were happening. It's really interesting how it's constructed. It's not a twist ending, but there's some reveal of why all the action happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So maybe I'll start by summarizing it, and you can sort of respond to my summary, and you can tell me if you think that my summary is correct
Okay.
and makes sense.
Sure.
So we're following this guy Yu Sun, and he's I think he's Chinese, and he's a spy for Germany in Britain. So like we're already all over the map. And from the very beginning of his narrative, so this is like his testimony. There's like a frame there. There's like a opening paragraph that says like this was found in like a history book as like a written testimony of this guy, and it's like starting in the middle. So like we're already like starting in the middle of like a narrative. We're missing the first half or something. And he says from the very beginning of what we're reading that like he's been revealed as a spy for Germany at the end of like World War II. Like this is the end of World War II. And so he's being chased by this Captain Madden, who's like this British intelligence officer who now knows his identity and is going to capture him and have him executed. And so Yu Sun is like sort of in like a cornered animal. He's like, this is the last day of his life, and he knows that. There's like an amazing line in there where he's like, it was so remarkable. Like the last day of my life, there should be like no portents or anything. Like he's grappling the fact that he's going to die. And so he makes this last act of like a kind of heroism. He wants to communicate to his German handler the location of a battery of artillery, a British artillery battery. And he has very little time because this Captain Madden is on his tail and is going to catch him. And so what he does, he opens a phone book and he finds a person whose name is Albert in the phone book. And he sets off on a mission to kill this Albert because he knows that his German handler is going to be reading the newspapers very carefully, and he's going to see an obituary, but that this guy was murdered by this Chinese spy, and he'll know that the battery is in the city of Albert. So that's like the motivating plot line. And then, as you were saying, also like when he finds Albert, Albert is a someone who studies like Chinese culture, and he is like has this book in his possession of this like writer philosopher Sui Pen, who's also an ancestor of our protagonist Yu Tsun. And he tells him that this was like his life's creation. It's like a labyrinth. It's like he said he was going to make a labyrinth and a book, and the book is the labyrinth. And then the final scene is our protagonist Yu Tsun kills Albert, and he says like, now I'm going to hang, but my message was communicated.
Yeah, it's such a crazy, like, madcap, like, off the wall, like almost like if it was comedic, it could be a skit out of the Park movies or something. But okay. It's just, it had like, would you call it like surreal? Would you say that it's like a surreal story?
I never thought of it that way, but maybe it. To me, it has an amazing atmosphere of like compression, of like a kind of claustrophobia. It's like a person who's writing in a manic, kind of panicked way. His actions are like panicked because he feels the walls closing in around him, and he's like grappling with that. That's sort of how I read it.
I was like paying attention the second time I read it, and I also kind of spot read after that. Like I said, I felt like I was lost in the interactions, and so like as an example, our main character, when he gets off the train and he sees the group of young boys, and they tell him about the forking path to get where he's going. But the surrealistic part, or the part that confused me at first, was the boys ask him if he's going to see Albert. So they start the interaction. He doesn't ask the boys where Albert is. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
Which is just so odd that like a stranger would come up to you and you would, as a little kid or anybody, say, by chance, are you looking for this person? It's really creepy to me.
Yeah, that's a good. I did pick up on that also, that particular interaction, and I wondered about that. And I speculated like maybe because it's a great question. Like I don't know the answer, like how exactly to explain that, but I was speculating in my mind like maybe he like got off the train where like the main attraction was like this one like rural area, and there's like a famous guy, Albert or something. But I don't really know. It is interesting, and that does feel a little surreal for sure.
And what are your thoughts on the book itself, the book and the story? So the labyrinthine, mazy book. How do you think? Like, I feel like it's kind of tying into the structure of the story that we're reading. Like, in the sense that, like, of course, the parallel between the forking roads to get to the house is similar to this maze-like book, but I feel like the whole plot has that same kind of feeling. Did you think the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. So the way I understand it is that he's in this like moment of like extremis. He's in this moment of like death, of facing death, and he has this vision. He has like this epiphany, like right at the precipice. And the epiphany that he has is the fact that the book is the labyrinth, like the fact that the way time forks, and the fact that he's standing here in these final moments, and he has this like interaction with Albert, who's the guy that who like is the, I guess, the curator of that book, and he's saying like, and Albert's explaining to him, in this reality we're friends, in a different reality we're enemies, in a different reality, and he's like in this moment of intense pressure, he has like this vision of like the forking of time, and like the contingency of life and the contingency of reality, and then and with that he dies. Like that's the final vision.
Yeah, on the second reading, like when they're having this interaction, our main character is at this person's house with the purpose of basically killing a random stranger, as far as the stranger is concerned. And they start talking about this book, and our character is like really interested and invested in the philosophy in which this person is like explaining. And he says to him, like, you know, I'm always going to look up to you, or something along those lines. Like, we're going to be on friendly terms. And it's the stranger who says, there's an alternative reality where we're enemies.
Yeah. I would love to see if I could find that.
Because the alternate reality is the story that we're reading.
Yeah, here it is. I think I found it. Okay. So this is where he's explaining the book. And of course, like, this is what I meant before, is like the epiphany that we get like at this moment of death. So he says to him, your ancestors did not believe in a uniform and absolute time. He believed in an infinite series of times, a growing, dizzying web of divergent, convergent, and parallel times. That fabric of times that approach one another, fork, are snipped off, or are simply unknown for centuries, contains all possibilities. In most of those times, we do not exist. In some, you exist and I do not. In others, I do and you do not. In still others, we both do. In this one, which the favoring hand of chance has dealt me, you have come to my home. In another, you have come through my garden, you find me dead. In another, I say these same words, but I am a ghost, an error. And so, yeah, I mean, that's, I think, what you were describing, that interaction.
Did you, the first time that you read it, did you have a feeling of, did you have a feeling that you wanted to like immediately reread the story to like recontextualize what happened through it, or did you feel like you kind of understood what was happening all the way through?
No, definitely the first one, right? Definitely had to reread it. It's a dizzying kind of story for sure, and he's throwing so much at you. Some other things that I picked up on this time around is, again, like coming back to this question of like the theme that sort of ties the story together, is that I noticed now, like from the very beginning of the story, like from the beginning of this narrative, before we even get to his plan to kill Albert and encountering the garden of forking paths, he's obsessed with like the sort of the determinism of his fate and like the irrevocability of like his circumstances.
Something that I've noticed in the stories that I've read so far, Borges, like the writing style that I've come across feels, I think one of the reasons that it feels so like off kilter is, I think Borges has an amazing way of kind of blurring the lines between fiction and nonfiction. And so, like, especially in this thing where it's written to be this document, but then he's also talking about like fictional books and kind of fictional ideas in a way that is written as if it's nonfiction, and it's kind of it's an amazing trick that he manages to like make you wonder, is it real or not? What do you think?
Yeah, totally. And that's one of the reasons that I was so like impressed when I started reading Borges for the first time, is that like it really expanded for me the idea of like what fiction can be, you know, like he's writing fiction in the form of nonfiction, basically. Like instead of writing books, instead of like writing a book, he'll like write a academic treatise about this book, which doesn't exist, and he'll just like reference that book, you know, things like that. He does that a lot.
I read there was a preface. This is my copy.
Oh, yeah, the same one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Like in the preface somewhere, like I don't know if it was the beginning of the story or what, but Borges talked about how almost like for efficiency's sake or just like pragmatism, it was kind of easier, instead of writing a 1,000-page book where you have to spend all this time and put all this stuff in it. It was more interesting to him to just imagine that this book existed, and then to just kind of do a commentary on it, and how much quicker, like a couple page summary of this book, uh, like allows him to like do so much more without having to do all the nuts and bolts work. And it seemed to free him up to investigate areas in a really creative way.
Yeah. Yeah. I read that too, in that whatever preface it was. And I agreed. That's sort of what makes him so unique.
It's brilliant. Like it's like I don't. It kind of sounds the wrong way, but it sounds like something that like an ingenious, lazy person would do.
Right.
I'm gonna get around the whole writing the 1,000-page book, and then to do something that's extremely clever, that kind of pulls those giant tomes back into the story. I love it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So here's like a quote, for example, that sort of stood out to me. It seemed incredible to me that that day without premonitions or symbols should be the day of my inexorable death. So like this theme of like the total determinism like of his fate, which he's like grappling with, you know. And then one last one is like the author of an atrocious undertaking ought to imagine that he has already accomplished it, ought to impose upon himself a future as irrevocable as the past. And so those are like examples, like from the beginning of the story, there's like this anxiety over the determinism and I guess also contingency inherent in life, you know.
There was a line early on that really struck me, and it's when he's trying to come up with this idea. He needs to communicate something, and he talks about not being able to shout loud enough.
Right.
And he ends the sentence by talking about like getting the word out before the bullet shatters his teeth.
Yep.
Like it was like such a brutal line, and it kind of reminds me of what you're saying, because it puts that fatalism or determinism in real terms, and also really early on takes that kind of philosophy and makes it suspenseful.
Yeah.
To have such an image like that, and to have a fear, like it's not a normal fear to have.
Yeah. It's like the butterfly effect a little bit. Familiar with the butterfly effect?
I don't even. I'm not. That's when. Is that like chaos theory? Like
Yeah. Totally.
Build up big things.
Right. Like the idea is that like a little minuscule thing, like a butterfly flapping its wings, one way or another, has huge impacts, like over time. Like it can have, affect weather systems. So this idea that like at the moment of death, he finds a way to do like a little gesture, which affects the trajectory of a war, you know.
What do you think of his plot? So the scheme that he came up with, like, what do you think of it?
Well, it might require like a little bit of suspension of disbelief to fully be on board. But I mean, I love it. It's like, yeah, it's like classic Borges for me. Like the way he's pulling from different places and different times and compressing, and it's like so over the top and like so extreme. How about you?
Like, I think it's an interesting. I think it puts a moral question in really interesting terms. So the simple like the simple unfolding is like if someone said to you like, is it worth killing one person to save 10,000 people? And then you can have a conversation about that. And essentially that's what we're told that he's doing. He's able to for the sake of one random murder, uh, help position his country in a war so people say
But it's much worse than that. It's much
uh,
worse than that because his country is Nazi Germany.
yeah, well, okay, that's a good point.
And he's and he considers himself like, and in the beginning he says he doesn't feel allegiance to his country. So there's like layers of like twists and turns and like the moral calculus, you know.
Yeah, like actually, while we're talking about it, like I have to like rethink about whether or not I want to root for this guy.
We probably don't.
You don't.
Definitely not.
Huh. So I guess now, like, the guy that was chasing him is the hero of the story,
Yeah, he's like the British intelligence officer who's like trying to kill a German spy. Yeah,
and the villain wins.
right.
The villain at least succeeded in his plot.
Yeah.
Huh.
He ends by the story. What's like the last line in the story? It's he grapples with that. Sorry. The last line of the story is he finds out that his message was received, like in the sense that he reads in the newspaper that the bombing went out the way he intended it to. And then he says the last line of the story is he does not know, no one can know my endless contrition and my weariness. So he's contrite, you know. It's bizarre. It's like I never read it through a moral lens. Like I read it through the lens of like just like total war amorality, you know.
So is this a good representation? I'm actually not sure how much of Borges that you've read, but would you say that this is like representative? These themes and ideas, are they representative for a broader scope of his short stories?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It's complicated. It's a great question. I've read. I think I've read all of Borges. I certainly read all of this book, and I have some other books of his essays and stuff like that, and his poetry. So I think I'm pretty close to reading all of this, everything he wrote. So that's a great question. I mean, like on a surface level, like Borges is fascinated with labyrinths. You know, labyrinths always come up. Every story that Borges writes always seems to have like some analog to math or physics. In this one, for example, this story is like historically significant because it actually like prefigured and presaged the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Like 20 years after the story was written, a mainstream like idea in physics was that like actually all realities exist, so that's like an amazing thing that Borges like has a tendency to do in like all the stories, like really tap into like deep ideas in physics and mathematics. But in many ways, no, because it has more narrative thrust than a lot of Borges' stories often do. A lot of Borges stories like are literally just like an academic paper, describing like some weird academic person who had like some weird life project or something. So definitely like it's one extreme. It's like one end of the spectrum. Like Borges is capable of this kind of like narrative driven stories, and he does have them, but it's like also many of them are much more like intellectual, I guess, and less narrative, like plot driven.
This afternoon, I also read. It's called The Library of Babel, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I actually have a video of that on my channel, by the way.
That one was much more digestible than the first story that I read by him. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Clone Akbar, me neither. Clone Akbar Orbis Tertis or something like that. What do you think of The Library of Babel?
That one sounded closer to what you were just talking about, as far as being like a fictional nonfiction essay, and it was just really interesting. Like I don't know if it's just like playing on that I'm kind of like a bookish person, that I like books. So the idea of like an infinite, strange library that exists sort of outside our time, like it talks about centuries going by and on and on and on. And I thought that it had a really interesting. I want to see if I can find it. There was like a slight narrative which I thought was hilarious. At the very short story, there's an end note, and so what we're told is that there's an infinite library somewhere, and then in the end note it mentions somebody that thinks that the infinite library is actually completely unnecessary because all you would really need is to have one infinite book, and you're going to have a book that has an infinite amount of pages, and which I think is just a very funny comment that like one would be more pragmatic than the other. But then the last line, using that silken vademecum would not be easy. Each apparent page would open into other similar pages. The inconceivable middle page would have no back. And I don't know why that like just fascinated me. Like a book that has infinite pages. So what would be the middle page? And then like I don't understand why a middle page wouldn't even have a back, but I love it.
Yeah. He has a story about a book with infinite pages. It's called The Book of Sand. It's very short. It's a very short story, but it's also, yeah, it's you can see that these are the questions that he's obsessed with. And you're totally right. Like your read, I love, and I think is spot on. When Borges is writing that endnote, I have it open in front of it. I have it open in front of me as well. I think Borges is like cracking up. I guess it's like a joke. It's like so funny. It's so funny. It's like a parody of like metaphysics, you know? It's like the metaphysics of the universe where you live in a library is like the infinite library is necessary. All you need is an infinite book. It's like absurd, you know? But it's like a statement about like our metaphysics, I think.
Yeah, it's really like I'm glad that we're talking now because the first story that I read, uh, I almost had a feeling that it felt like inapproachable, and even though it gave me a lot to think about, I didn't have like a real strong motivation to keep investigating the author.
Mm-hmm.
And the detective story, the Garden of the Forking Paths, even though I think it's like just as bewildering, it really got my attention, and it was like intriguing and suspenseful, and kind of had like a lot of thought provoking things that we've been talking about. But so then, after that, reading the Library of Babel, um, like because you kind of contacted me and said you want to talk about this, and they gave me motivation to read a couple more things. Like I already feel like I'm on so much more firm footing to kind of let my guard down and enjoy the writer just doing his work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, mm-hmm. I think for most people, for everyone, I mean, I come from sort of like a very math background. Like I studied physics in college, but I think for most people who don't come from that background, there's going to be plenty of Borges stories, which are just like not interesting, you know? And maybe not just math background, like maybe an academic background. Like I feel like Borges is a mesh in like an academic culture. He's sort of like making a parody of like academic writing sometimes and academic ideas. And to people where like there's plenty of people where it just won't be interesting, you know, or particularly compelling, I think. Personally, I love it, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm kind of. I think I've said most of what I was thinking about. Do you have any more thoughts?
No, this was great. This was really fun.
Okay. I guess do you want to wrap it up then?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you've been watching, thank you, and we would both love to hear your thoughts on Borges, if you have any favorite short stories or nonfiction work, or and anything that you'd like to say about Borges. I know that we would both be more than happy to hear about it. So that's it for me. Ami, would you like to say anything or say goodbye?
Thank you so much. And yeah, Matthew, you always have such good discussions in your comments field. So yeah, always a pleasure to read those. And so hopefully that's it. Thanks so much, Matthew.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.